Thank you for having me. I'm very privileged to be here. The only outdated part of that biography is that, in fact, my sons are now 23 and 21. I have one who rode for Australia and one who believes that all people who play sport are dickheads. Excuse the French, but that is, in fact, what he says. That's my last swear word, I promise. I am, in fact, I feel a great attachment to South Australia, and that's because I do write and contribute to the Adelaide Advertiser. So I do get constant feedback about the state of sport and the sporting landscape in this great city and state of yours, particularly with relation, of course, to AFL. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm a walking, talking example of diversity in sport. A happy byproduct of a decade, the 80s, when media executives finally realised that females might, just might, crack it in that last great male bastion, sport. I already had female colleagues as a cadet and as a young graded journalist, and I was one of them, who were court reporters, police roundsmen, parliament experts, those who covered the stock exchange, real estate, agriculture. But in Brisbane and in most other Australian cities and towns, the sports desk was for blokes only. A mysterious boys' club corner of the newsroom we girls can only ever glance at as we walk to desks somewhere far away. After I covered the 1982 Commonwealth Games, as a young cadet, I was handed the dubious honour of covering the archery and the men's high jump. Nevertheless, I had the bug. This was what I wanted to do. 3 years into my cadetship, I felt like all of my worlds had happily collided into one beautiful place called sports reporting. I loved playing sport as a young girl on the Gold Coast in Queensland. The whole family, cousins, aunts, grandparents and parents, just like your family, we're all sport obsessed. We girls swam, we played netball, we threw the discus, the javelin, played water polo, hockey, ball games, life-saving. The boys did cricket, swimming, rugby union, league, Aussie rules, running. And when we weren't playing, we were watching the local Aussie rules competition. The Surfers Paradise Demons were our team. We parked our cars around the oval and flashed our lights when they scored a goal. My heart did not sing when the day the sports editor of the Courier Mail told me I was out of luck in terms of wanting to be a sports journalist. Women did not do sport at the paper, he said, and he wasn't offering me a chance to be the exception. I was out of luck. I was young, naive, but not so stupid that I wasn't offended by the attitude. I started applying for other jobs anywhere away from a newspaper that was so entrenched in its maleness that I had to get away. A Channel 10 boss called Des McWilliam interviewed me for a police rounds job. He listened to me talking about my alleged affection for the world of crime. He laughed and he offered me a job in sport. He reckoned I was worth the gamble and was so not suited to being a crime reporter. The rest, as they say, is history. 35 years of doing a job that is like a hobby, of being the first female in a rugby league dressing room in Queensland, of watching as our annual female sports reporters' lunch went from 2 of us to filling an entire restaurant. We are, I am proud to say, now commonplace in dressing sheds, on the sidelines and in the press box. Dare I say it, I believe women enrich coverage of sport in Australia and around the world. We are different, but in a very good way. My favourite story of those early days were the rules the boys playing league decided to impose on me. Instead of rejecting outright the notion of a girl in a dressing room, they decided to embrace it on certain conditions. If I looked down, below the belt, so to speak, I would cop a week's ban. A clown called Peter Jackson, who was sadly no longer with us, was as good a wag as he was a footy player. He decided to dance through the dressing room in the nude. I took a peek and copped the ban. I tell you about me because so much of what we call diversity in sport creeps up on us accidentally. It's not by good design or management. It just evolves in random ways, with little foresight and with mixed results. Nobody sat back in an office 40 years ago and deigned that women needed a place in the sports media. There was no system to train females, There was no green light given by the sports themselves to accept that male-female diversity in sports media had arrived. Diversity in sport now means so many different things. It's not just about the involvement of more females and offering women more opportunities to achieve in their chosen sports endeavour. It's about sex, race, sexuality, age, culture, dare I say it, class. It's about how we plan for the future of Australian sport, increasing participation and spectator levels across a broad range of very diverse groups. How we can use the digital age, particularly social media, and the revolution taking place in countries like China and India to best prepare for a sporting landscape that reflects the rich tapestry of life in this most sporting of nations. So where to begin? A recent Australian Sports Commission study into the lack of coverage for women's sport on television was seeking to find a reason to make an entire channel dedicated to women's sport that would run all day, every day. They asked a vast range of people what they thought. The politically correct did not think it through and said it must happen. I told the interview panel it was a waste of time, resources and money. The reason netball occupies a strong space on television is that it already has a ridiculously strong broad participation base at grassroots level. The audience was ready-made with more than 500,000 girls playing the game every Saturday morning, and even then it got ditched from free-to-air television. Netball had to fine-tune its national elite competition so that we saw only the best each and every week. The women knew they had to be fitter, faster, better. They still do it, by the way, for around $200 a game. For me, there's something that remains pure and innocent about women's sport. The reason we overachieve at Olympics level is that women don't have access to male professional sports, particularly, as we know, football, and if they do, they're paid 2 parts of nothing to do it. Girls and women play sport because they love it. This should never, ever change. They don't do it for money. Putting a 24-hour female channel on television defies logic because it's tokenism at its worst. Nobody will watch it, or certainly nowhere near the numbers who tune into a Port Adelaide game. Those women in elite soccer, netball, cricket, rugby union and hockey who decide to play any of these sports will not do it because they might end up on TV. My view is that our elite female athletes have a much bigger role to play if they use social media cleverly to target every single young girl in Australia who's tossing up whether or not to dump sport as she enters the dark days of adolescence. We do not have genuine male-female diversity in Australian sport because women don't play compulsory Saturday sport like their brothers do. This doesn't just stop them playing sport as they get older, it stops them liking it, so they don't go and watch it. They drop out of all team sport because 1, it's seen as uncool, 2, it's not the body image that they've had shoved down their throats on social media, and 3, it takes time out of their academic pursuits. So what happens then is that 18-year-old girls who overachieve at high school enter university without the network of mates the boys have found through sport at high school. I can't for the devil of me work out why more experts don't realise that those networks are why more men end up in disproportionate numbers in boardrooms and as chief executives. Women might be brainier, they get better marks, but too many don't crack it in the workforce at the highest levels because they have no network built up from years on the playing fields. Yes, we've come a long way, but until that fundamental issue is addressed, we will not be truly equal. There will be no diversity in our sporting boardrooms. Social media, and women are masters of it, can open avenues of communication to young females from older athletes that no 24-hour channel could ever hope to deliver. Through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the audience is vast and receptive. Female athletes can talk diet, health, fitness, motherhood, and how all of those things are just better if sport's involved. Even going to a footy game is a preferable pastime for a 14-year-old girl than staying at home. Diversity is not just about the male-female stuff. It's about race, the inclusion of everybody in all sport across a nation that's had its fair share of troubles in terms of immigration and Indigenous welfare. The AFL are the champions of the Aboriginal football revolution and have done it in a sensitive, generally non-tokenistic way. Yes, problems remain with spot fires where racial vilification still occurs, but the great news is that we notice it now. We don't like it, and most of us actually hate it. Aussie Rules fans celebrate the athleticism of Indigenous males. The smart-thinking AFL suits also recognise that the untapped potential lying dormant in our generally alienated Sudanese and Somali communities should also be explored. They haven't quite nailed it, but there's no doubt that if they do, an entire new world will open up in terms of talent for the AFL and a better world for those young girls and boys from these communities. A glance at the AFL's honour roll is a testament to multiculturalism. The Greeks and Italians embraced Aussie rules, and their sons became among the greatest in the sport. Jesaulenko, Favola, DP Domenico. It's no coincidence that our Greek and Italian friends are held up as models of how immigration policy should work. For the communities who battle with a teenage population that feels persecuted and lonely, sport offers so much. The social experiment of creating entire towns with just one immigrant community as its heart has not been as successful as it was planned because sport was overlooked as a way of building bridges, of therapy for broken souls. Governments wondering how to address the alienation of immigrant communities need look no further than the taxi driver from Melbourne, who had the AFL blaring out on his radio. He had very little English, learnt on the run from the radio commentary. He had only been here for 3 months. He knew he loved the Western Bulldogs and thankfully already hated Collingwood. He has 3 daughters playing Auskick and a wife who's now doing tuck shop at the Saturday games. Now, it's naive to suggest that the current crisis enveloping pockets of Sydney and Melbourne's Islam communities may have been avoided with sport. There's no doubt, though, that the evidence is compelling about the way it builds stronger communities at the same time as subtly introducing traditional Australian values to new cultural groups. Rugby league is now a sport that boasts that 38% of its elite players are of Polynesian descent. Yes, it's created some problems in that it forces younger Anglo-Saxon kids out of the sport earlier because of the sheer size and strength of these Polynesian kids. We call it the Tongan sidestep because it involves no stepping at all. 100-kilo steamroller running straight through, over and above the defenders. What it does do, though, is it ensures that league audiences are not predominantly Anglo-Saxon, that crowds are incredibly diverse, not just Maoris and Polynesians, but Lebanese, Aboriginal, Maltese. The worst behaved of these are not our Polynesian friends. The baddies tend to be the ones with bikie connections, third-generation Australians, rather than our newer fans. Diversification is something that many sports trumpet but fail to deliver. A study released just yesterday underlined a gaping hole in the theory that gay men and women are now widely accepted in dressing rooms across all sport. A resoundingly high percentage of them, up to 90%, say they suffered chronic discrimination, subtle and blatant, from the ages of 17 to 22, which is a genuine deterrent to them continuing to take part. In some female elite sports teams, there's discrimination against straight women, such is the high percentage of gay women taking part. As the mother of 2 sons brought up in Australia's gayest suburb of Darlinghurst, I can proudly say no such stuff comes from their mouths or those of their mates. They readily accepted young gay men into their football teams and celebrated the fact that 17-year-olds had the guts to tell them they were coming out. Never a nasty word was said to those kids, and if someone from a more bigoted school took them on, the occasional punch didn't go astray. I don't think sport or sports bodies are entirely to blame for the homophobic stuff in sport. I believe certain responsibilities come with parenting and from the home. It won't be until all mothers and fathers embrace homosexuality rather than spurn it that we'll enter into a rainbow world. That shouldn't let sport off though. The more homophobia is talked about, addressed and counselled, the better. Well, now to the big elephant, or should I say tiger, in the room. There are 1 million Chinese people living in Australia. The sports of tennis, golf and soccer are growing so rapidly in China with the rise of a middle class that nobody quite knows where it's all going to end. Instead of embracing the rise of China as a sporting powerhouse, Australians tend to fear it, and even resentment sets in. Issues of systemic doping have clouded the Chinese entree to the world of sport. At the same time, the closeted and protective regime of the world's largest nation has tended to look inwards rather than out. But that's about to change. China wants to be the best in the world at sport, not just in their world. They know they have the numbers, and now they're getting the money. Luxury sponsors are queuing up to jump on board to sell to the world's biggest market. Here in Australia, soccer in Australia has nailed diversity in every possible way, but it's been unable to affiliate the Chinese community to its teams or fan base. Even the Asian Cup, which achieved way beyond anyone's expectations, still didn't bring fans to the A-League. Once it does, David Gallop, the sports boss, believes soccer will be the #1 code in Australia. That should be a really scary thought for football codes entrenched in the self-belief that soccer will always be a poor relation. Asians have steadfastly refused to embrace Aussie rules, rugby union or rugby league. Somehow we still view the Chinese as genuine strangers with no sporting affiliations. When I worked at the breakaway Super League in the mid-90s, our then boss John Rebo placed an ad in a Cantonese newspaper looking for Chinese rugby league callers. We thought he was nuts, Rupert Murdoch thought he was nuts, and nobody at Super League ever mentioned the C word, China, again. But Gallop knows they love the round ball game, so the FFA is working feverishly on building relations with Asia. Gallop goes to Asia once every 3 weeks. He has delegates travelling to Asia or living there who speak Mandarin and Cantonese. Soccer knows the Red Revolution is coming and they want to be part of it. The Gil McLaughlins and Dave Smiths have turned a blind and ignorant eye to what Asia could deliver in diversity, income and popularity for their sports. As I said at the beginning, diversity more often than not comes about by accident than good management. The best example of this is the greying of major Aussie sports like cycling, rowing, netball, triathlon and touch football. People who've never been elite athletes are buying up expensive lycra, zoot suits and netball skirts faster than anyone in the country. The over 40s brigade are the butt of many jokes, but they fill hotel rooms by the thousands when they have a Masters event. They buy $5,000 bikes. They fill cafes and they're master users of social media, increasing all the time their participation base. These people invariably fall into the much-loved AB demographic, big wage earners who can finally afford the time and money to pursue their sports. Rowing admits quite sheepishly that the high-performance end of its sport at elite clubs is financed by masters who buy the 40,000 boats in return for being allowed to use them twice a week. My son Tom, as I said, was an elite rower and is now an elite rowing coach and bike racer who puts up with what he calls the old lycra brigade in his cafe, and then when he rides up and down the rowing course at big events. You see, the oldies can afford to buy a bike and observe from the sidelines. They even offer their opinions on the technique of Tom's athletes, which he hates. But he's finally seeing a direct correlation between the growing number of boats in the shed with the increased masters' numbers, and a far bigger array of bike racing gear in bike shops because of his richer, greyer cohorts. Diversity has arrived, but not with any real planning from the sports involved. Imagine if all of these sports actively recruited over 40s. The days of fundraising and chook raffles would be over. Everyone would be a winner. The greys get to do their sport and the young ones are funded by them. A few final words. Governments would have you believe that by directing money away from elite sport to general, broader participation, you're automatically diversifying sport. That is plain wrong. You must have elite sport so that women, Muslims, Chinese, homosexuals, Aborigines and over 40s can aspire to greatness in their worlds. Without sporting greats, we are left with kids running around school ovals with no sense of purpose or aspiration to be better. It's a fine balance, but it can be achieved. Providing funding for every kid to play 25 minutes of sport a week in their school playground will achieve zilch, except create a dearth of talent at the top of sport and a nation of unmotivated people. With diversity across all sport, the country becomes a better place, a happier place. I'll always remember what my grandfather told me. Sport opens doors. It means you can walk into any room in the world and find something in common with someone else. You can sit at any sports ground anywhere in Australia and strike up a conversation. No, it's not a hill of beans. It's not curing cancer. But it sure as hell makes you happy, more agreeable, and a better person. That is what we must explore as Australia becomes home to more and more Somalis, Chinese and Indians. It is why we must accept gay people as sports lovers first, homosexuals second, and why sport should be a model for all aspects of life, a basis for innovation and change across every range of our society. Always remember that sport makes your heart sing, and not much else can make you say that over and over again. Thank you.